Master, please, I never meant to...
Silence. Your regret cannot undo what you have done.
Master, please, I had no choice.
We always have a choice, Elias.
They're gone. The words echoed across the emergency command hall before anyone moved. The Western Quarantine District has collapsed. More than 300 infected civilians. No survivors. Silence settled over the room like ash. Then every pair of eyes turned toward me. General Adrian Vale slammed both hands onto the oak table. This would never have happened if Dr. Rowan Ashford had continued supplying antidotes. The accusation landed exactly where he intended. Not on the officials. Not on the Royal Medical Council. On me. Across the table, Council Director Helena Cross folded her hands gracefully. I warned everyone, she said softly. Master Rowan has become difficult. He abandoned his duties months ago. Several council members nodded. Someone whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. He used to care. Another voice followed. He changed. I looked at none of them. Outside the stained glass windows, black smoke curled above the Capitol. The plague had returned. Exactly as I had predicted. Exactly as they had refused to believe. General Vale pointed at me. Say something. His voice thundered. People are dying. The room waited. I remembered another meeting. 5 years earlier. Different faces. Same table. Same accusations. Only then, I had fought. I had presented evidence. Patient records. Research journals. Witnesses. None of it mattered. When my apprentice, Elias Mercer, stood before the council wearing my own healer's robe and claiming the cure as his life's work, they applauded him. When I objected, they called me jealous. When I explained that the formula was incomplete, they stripped my authority. When I warned the medicine would fail after prolonged mutations, they laughed. Today, the plague had evolved exactly as my research predicted. I slowly stood. The room quieted. I have nothing to say. General Vale stared. You. I resigned from the Royal Medical Council 6 months ago. Helena's elegant smile tightened. You still have a responsibility. No. My answer was calm. My responsibility ended the day this kingdom decided truth mattered less than convenience. A council elder rose angrily. How dare you speak like this while innocent people die? I met his eyes. I spent 17 years preventing this. No one answered. Because it was true. For 17 years, I had worked without rest. I crossed frozen mountains for herbs no one else could identify. I treated villages forgotten by nobles. I trained healers who later outranked me. I gave away every discovery freely. I never asked for titles. Only that medicine remain honest. Helena broke the silence. Master Rowan. She deliberately used the old title. If pride is the issue. It isn't. Then return. No. The kingdom needs you. The kingdom needed me years ago. General Vale stepped closer. If you refuse. I looked at him quietly. Then refuse. His jaw clenched. You would watch us fail. I thought about the thousands of reports buried beneath council archives. The requests ignored. The budget cuts. The fake clinical trials. The ceremonies celebrating Elias. The speeches declaring the plague defeated. I already watched. No anger. No shouting. Only exhaustion. The commander of the Royal Guard opened the chamber doors. A young messenger stumbled inside. Blood stained his sleeve. He collapsed to one knee. Your Majesty. His breathing shook. The northern hospitals. He swallowed. Their antidotes stopped working. The room exploded into panic. Impossible. How? Check the reserves. Send more supplies. Increase dosage. Call Master Elias. Find him. Find him now. I remained where I stood. Helena glanced toward me. For the first time, I saw fear. Real fear. Not because people were dying. Because she suddenly remembered exactly whose research she had buried. I walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. No one knew whether they had the right anymore. Behind me, someone shouted, "Where is Elias?" No one answered. Because no one had seen the kingdom's celebrated healer in 3 days. The doors closed behind me. For the first time in years. Their disaster no longer belonged to me. Rain began falling as I crossed the palace courtyard. Cold. Steady. Almost peaceful. The capital was louder than usual. Church bells rang continuously. Medical wagons raced through flooded streets. Families crowded pharmacies. Everyone believed another cure would appear, just as it always had. because I had always made sure one did. Not this time. Not because I wished suffering upon anyone, but because the council had destroyed the only system capable of responding before outbreaks spread. Healing was never about one miracle medicine. It was preparation, observation, adaptation. The kingdom had replaced all three with ceremonies and politics. My master. The voice came from behind. I stopped. Old Thomas hurried across the courtyard carrying 2 umbrellas. His white beard dripped with rainwater. He had worked beside me for 15 years before retiring to the monastery gardens. Unlike everyone else, he had never cared about titles. You knew, he said quietly. Yes. And you still left. I had to. He studied my face. You look tired. I am. Thomas handed me an umbrella. I kept something. He reached into his satchel and produced a leather notebook. My notebook. The original plague journal. I blinked. I thought Helena confiscated it. I copied the inventory before they burned the archives. He smiled faintly. I hid this one. I accepted it carefully. The leather was worn. Inside were 17 years of observations. Mutations. Seasonal patterns. Environmental triggers. The complete treatment strategy. Not just the cure. Everything. I thought it was lost. I couldn't allow that. We stood quietly beneath the rain. Finally Thomas spoke again. They'll come. I know. They'll beg. I know. What will you do? I looked toward the city. Ambulance bells echoed through the streets. Smoke climbed into gray clouds. People still believed the Royal Medical Council could save them. By tomorrow, that belief would begin breaking. I won't stop them from making their choices. Thomas nodded slowly. You finally learned. No. I closed the notebook gently. I finally accepted that I cannot save people determined to ignore the truth. By sunset, the capital had transformed. The lively market streets were nearly empty, shutters bolted against fear. Bells from the Temple of Mercy rang, without pause as volunteers carried stretchers through the rain. Every passing cart carried someone wrapped in blankets, coughing in a blood-stained cloth. I did not turn away, neither did I run toward them. For years, I would have already been organizing clinics, drafting emergency protocols, and sending riders to every province. Instead, I unlocked the weather door of my small hillside clinic. Dust floated through the evening light. The shelves were exactly as I had left them 6 months earlier. Glass jars, bundles of dried herbs, a stone mortar worn smooth by decades of work. Nothing had changed, except me. A hesitant knock broke the silence. When I opened the door, a young woman stood there with a boy no older than 10. The child's skin was pale, but his breathing was steady. Master Ashford, she whispered, lowering her head. I didn't know where else to go. You've traveled far. 3 days. She hesitated before adding, we heard. They said you stopped healing people. I looked at the frightened child, gripping her sleeve. I stopped serving the council. Her eyes searched mine. Will you still help him? I knelt before the boy. What is your name? Finn. When did the fever begin? This morning. His answers were clear. His pulse was regular. Not the new plague. Only a severe mountain infection from contaminated water. I prepared an herbal infusion while the boy watched every movement. Drink this slowly. The mother reached into a small pouch. I don't have much. I closed her hand over the coins. Buy food. Tears filled her eyes. They called you selfish. I smiled faintly. People often believe the loudest story. She bowed deeply before leaving. As the door closed, I stared at the empty cup on my work table. I had not stopped healing. I had stopped feeding a system that rewarded lies. Another knock came. This time it was harder. Urgent. 3 royal guards stood outside. Their polished armor was streaked with mud. The captain removed his helmet. Master Rowan, I am no longer a master of the council. Not of the council. He lowered his head. Of medicine. His humility surprised me. The general requests your presence. I declined. The request has become an order. I met his eyes. No. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. Please don't make this difficult. I'm not. Silence stretched between us. Finally he exhaled. I lost my sister last year. I waited. Your treatment gave us 6 more months with her. His voice cracked. I've never forgotten. He stepped aside instead of blocking my doorway. I won't force you. The other guards stared at him. But they'll keep sending people. I know. He saluted, not to a superior officer, but to the man who had once saved his family. Then they left. I watched them disappear into the rain. Before midnight, Another visitor arrived. This one did not knock. The clinic door burst open. Elias Mercer stumbled inside. His expensive ceremonial robes were soaked, and the golden healer's emblem on his chest was smeared with mud. He looked nothing like the celebrated genius whose portrait hung throughout the capital. He looked terrified. "Master," the word caught his throat. I said nothing. He dropped to his knees. "They're dying. I know. I tried everything. I know. The formula isn't working anymore. I know." His shoulders shook. You knew this would happen. I warned you 5 years ago." His face twisted with shame. "They wouldn't listen. You didn't either. I thought." He laughed bitterly. "I thought I understood your research. You memorized it." He lowered his head. "You never understood it." The room fell silent, except for the rain striking the roof. Finally, he whispered, "Please come back." I poured another cup of herbal tea and placed it on the table between us. "You accepted their praise." He closed his eyes. "Yes." "You accepted my position." "Yes." "You watched while they called me a fraud." His fingers trembled. "Yes." "You never spoke." A long silence. Then, barely audible, "No." It was the first honest answer he had given. He had never spoken. Not once. Not when the council promoted him. Not when they erased my name from the journals. Not when they burned the original records. Fear had made him silent. Now that same silence had become unbearable. "I cannot undo it," he said. "No, but you can still save everyone." I looked at him for a long moment. "I can save many." Hope flickered across his face. But not like before. His expression froze. "The kingdom doesn't need another miracle. It needs the truth." He swallowed hard. "If I confess, they'll destroy me." "No." I stood and looked out at the distant lights of the capital. "They'll destroy the mask they created." Behind me, Elias began to cry. Not loudly, but with the quiet grief of someone who finally understood the weight of every lie he had allowed to stand. Far below the hill, the palace bells rang again. Long, heavy, different from before. Not an alarm, a summons. Someone important had fallen ill. And for the first time since the plague returned, I realized the crisis had reached the palace itself. The kingdom's greatest secret could no longer remain behind closed doors.
The palace summons arrived before dawn. Not as a royal decree. Not as a command backed by soldiers. A single carriage climbed the winding road to my clinic through thick morning fog. Its wheels stopped outside my gate, and no one stepped out immediately. I watched from the porch, a steaming cup of tea warming my hands. Finally, the carriage door opened. Princess Ilera descended alone. No guards. No banners. No royal pride. Her emerald cloak was soaked from the mist, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She climbed the stone steps herself. I came without the council knowing. You shouldn't have. They would have stopped me. She stopped an arm's length away. My father is dying. I remained silent. The physicians say the plague has reached his lungs. They're wrong. Her eyes widened. You haven't examined him. I don't need to. She frowned. The king's symptoms aren't from the plague. A long pause followed. What is it? A poisoning. Her breath caught. I watched understanding slowly replace panic. The council. They're treating poison with plague medicine. She whispered, that would make it worse. Much worse. She stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. How do you know? Because I wrote the treatment manual they no longer use. She lowered her head. I believed what they said about you. I know. They said you became arrogant. I know. They said you abandoned the kingdom. I know. Tears gathered in her eyes. And none of it was true. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence carried more weight than forgiveness. She slowly removed a velvet case from inside her cloak. I found this. Inside lay an old bronze medal. The royal healer's honor. Mine. I had received it 12 years ago after containing the crimson fever outbreak. The council had demanded I return it when they stripped me of my position. I thought they melted it down, I said. They lied. She placed it gently on my table. My father never approved removing your name. That surprised me. The decree? Forged. The word lingered between us. A forged royal order. Someone had gone much further than stealing credit. Someone had manipulated the throne itself. For the first time in months, something inside me shifted. Not anger.
Curiosity.
Who showed you this? The king's archivist. Does anyone else know? She shook her head. He disappeared last night. The warmth left the room. Disappeared? No one can find him. I looked toward the mist-covered road. This plague was no longer simply about medicine. Someone was erasing witnesses. By noon, rumors swept across the capital. Master Elias Mercer had vanished. The Royal Medical Council denied it. General Adrian Vale denied it. Helena Cross insisted Elias was conducting advanced research. I knew better. People only disappeared when they knew too much. Thomas arrived shortly after midday carrying baskets of medicinal plants. He noticed the princess's carriage immediately. So, he smiled sadly. They've started coming one by one. They're frightened. They should be. We worked together in silence, grinding herbs. After nearly an hour, Thomas spoke. Will you go? To the palace? He nodded. Not yet. Because of Helena?
No.
The poison? No. He stopped grinding. Then why? I carefully measured powdered bark into small paper packets. Because they're still hiding something. Thomas looked thoughtful. You think this is bigger? I know it is. Just then another frantic knock echoed through the clinic. The captain of the Royal Guard entered, breathing heavily. Master Rowan. What happened? We found Master Elias.
Alive.
But barely. His face was pale. They tried to kill him. Elias lay unconscious inside a monastery infirmary. His wrists bore rope marks. Bruises covered one side of his face. Someone had wanted information. Or silence. A physician stepped aside as I entered. He keeps repeating one sentence. What sentence? He says. The physician swallowed. The original records still exist. I walked to Elias' bedside. His breathing was uneven. A fever burned beneath his skin. Not plague. A sedative. Someone had drugged him heavily. His eyelids fluttered. Master. I'm here. He struggled to focus. They know.
Who?
The archives. His breathing quickened. They didn't burn everything. Where? He gripped my sleeve with surprising strength. The underground library. His voice became barely audible. Beneath the council hall. Then he lost consciousness again. Thomas looked at me. The originals. Perhaps. If they still exist, everything changes. Not because I wanted my reputation restored. Because evidence speaks louder than memory. If the original research survived, no one could rewrite history again. But if someone had already tried to murder Elias, they would kill again. The captain stepped closer. I can gather soldiers. I shook my head. They'll expect soldiers. What do you need? A librarian. He blinked. A what? The one profession everyone ignores. The underground library smelled of damp parchment and forgotten promises. Most of the palace believed it had been sealed decades ago. It hadn't. Princess Ilera led us through a narrow service passage behind the old records office, carrying only a lantern. Beside her walked Miriam Holt, the elderly royal librarian whose gray hair was tied into a simple braid. No one notices librarians, Miriam said quietly. That's why we hear everything. She pressed a hidden latch beneath a cracked stone carving. A section of the wall shifted with a low rumble. Cold air rushed from below. Thomas looked at me. So they really hid it. They hid more than books. We descended a spiral staircase into darkness. Shelves stretched farther than the lantern light could reach. Thousands of ledgers, medical records, royal decrees, research journals, history itself. Miriam moved confidently between the aisles. I catalogued these before the council restricted access. She stopped before an iron cabinet. The records from 17 years ago should be here. She unlocked it. Empty. My heartbeat slowed rather than quickened. They've already been here. Miriam stared in disbelief. No. Only one folder remained. Its cover bore my handwriting. Inside was a single page. Not research. A note. Too late. Nothing else. Thomas cursed under his breath. Princess Ilera looked around nervously. They knew we'd come.
No.
I examined the dust inside the cabinet. They knew someone would. Fresh footprints crossed the stone floor. Heavy boots. At least 4 people. Recent. They removed everything yesterday. Miriam whispered. Then where did they take it? Before I could answer, footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Not ours. Lanterns. Voices. Someone was coming. Alara instinctively reached for the dagger hidden beneath her cloak. I raised one hand.
No.
We're trapped. Not yet. The approaching voices grew louder. General Adrian Vale. I recognized his commanding tone instantly. Search every shelf. Another voice followed. Helena Cross. If Rowan came, he won't leave empty-handed.
Thomas looked at me.
What now? I noticed something almost invisible carved into the edge of the empty cabinet. A tiny symbol. An ash leaf.
Mine.
I had carved it years ago while organizing records late into the night. Beneath it was a second mark I did not remember. 3 small lines pointing left. Not decoration. A direction. I slid the cabinet sideways. Behind it lay a narrow passage barely wide enough for one person. Miriam gasped. I never knew this existed. I built it. Years ago, after discovering moisture-damaged valuable records, I had convinced palace masons to create ventilation channels behind the archives. Only 3 people had known.
Me.
The chief mason. The late royal archivist. The archivist who had now disappeared. He left this for us, I murmured. We slipped into the hidden passage moments before lantern light flooded the archive chamber. Through a narrow crack in the stone, I watched Helena inspect the empty cabinet. Her calm mask finally slipped. They're gone. General Vale frowned. I thought you moved them. I did. Then where are they? She didn't answer. For the first time, confusion crossed her face. Someone had stolen the evidence. Before she could. Which meant there was another player neither of us had expected. As Helena searched frantically, one of her assistants approached. Director? What? The king's condition has worsened. Her expression hardened. Increase the antidote dosage. The assistant hesitated. The physicians say it's making him weaker. Then increase it anyway. Even General Vale looked uneasy. Helena. If he dies before the ceremony, everything collapses. Ceremony? I exchanged a glance with Princess Alara. She had heard it too. There was a ceremony planned. One important enough to risk the king's life. Helena lowered her voice, but not enough. The succession must happen exactly as scheduled. The words echoed in the darkness. This had never been only about the plague. Someone was using the crisis to reshape the kingdom itself. General Vale slowly turned toward Helena. You never told me the king was poisoned. She froze. A single heartbeat passed. Then another. You knew, he asked. Her silence answered him. The alliance between them cracked without a single raised voice. I watched from the shadows. Consequences had begun. And I still hadn't lifted a finger.
The hidden passage opened into an abandoned wine cellar beneath the eastern wing of the palace. The stale air carried the scent of damp stone and old oak barrels. Princess Alara extinguished her lantern before speaking. They poisoned my father. It wasn't a question. Thomas leaned against the wall, his weathered face unusually grim. They've been treating poison as plague. And now they're trying to erase every record that proves Rowan created the original cure, Alara whispered. Miriam clasped her trembling hands together. They're rewriting history. I remained quiet. History had already been rewritten once. The only difference now was that too many cracks had appeared in the story. Eventually, lies begin competing with one another. That is when they collapse. A hidden staircase led us into the palace gardens. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, but the palace itself felt darker than before. Royal guards hurried through the courtyards carrying sealed orders. Messengers rode out through the eastern gate every few minutes. Something significant was happening. Captain Leon, the same officer who had visited my clinic, approached us discreetly. He bowed. Master Rowan, what news? The council has declared a state of medical emergency. I nodded. As expected, they've also ordered every independent healer to surrender their research. Thomas laughed bitterly. So they can burn more evidence? Leon lowered his voice. Worse. They're arresting anyone who questions Master Elias' discoveries. Princess Alara's eyes widened. They're making him a scapegoat. No. I looked toward the council tower. They're preparing another lie. By afternoon, the kingdom's largest public square overflowed with frightened citizens. The Royal Medical Council had called an emergency address. Curiosity drew me there, though I stayed near the back of the crowd beneath the shade of an old elm. No one recognized me beneath my plain, traveling cloak. On the stone platform stood Helena Cross. Elegant, composed, untouched by panic. General Adrian Vale stood several steps behind her. His expression was unreadable. Helena raised both hands. My fellow citizens. The square slowly quieted. Our beloved king has unfortunately fallen victim to an unusually aggressive strain of the plague. A murmur spread. She continued. The council has identified the cause. She paused dramatically. A stolen and corrupted medical formula. Several people gasped. Helena's voice sharpened. A former council physician secretly altered the kingdom's antidotes before abandoning his post. The crowd erupted. Someone shouted. Who? Helena answered without hesitation. Rowan Ashford. For several seconds. No one spoke. Then came anger. He betrayed us. I always suspected him. Arrest him. He let people die. The words washed over me like distant rain. I had imagined this moment many times over the past 5 years. Strangely, it no longer hurt. Truth does not become false because it is shouted against. Helena continued. The council has authorized his immediate capture. Captain Leon, standing beside me in disguise, whispered, Say the word. I glanced at him. For what? We can expose her. With what evidence? He hesitated. Exactly. Suspicion was not proof. Not yet. A sudden disturbance interrupted Helena's speech. A rider burst into the square, his horse lathered with sweat. He dismounted before the platform and fell to one knee. Director. She frowned. What is it? The southern quarantine camps. He struggled for breath. They rejected the council's medicine. The crowd became silent. Helena's expression hardened. And they're recovering. Confusion spread through the square. What treatment? The messenger swallowed. Traditional herbal compounds. Thomas smiled beside me. They ignored the council. The messenger continued. The physicians followed treatment notes, signed only with the initials. He unfolded a damp piece of paper. R.A. Hundreds of faces turned toward Helena. She forced a smile. A coincidence. But doubt had entered the crowd. Once doubt appears, fear follows. That evening, word spread through the capital faster than any official announcement. 3 villages had survived without the council's antidote. Instead, local healers had relied on handwritten protocols copied years earlier from my original training lectures. Not the famous formula. The complete treatment system. Isolation. Nutrition. Water purification. Observation. Adaptive herbal combinations. The methods the council had abandoned because they required patience instead of spectacle. People began asking questions. Why had no one been taught these methods recently? Why had every physician been ordered to use only Elias' formula? Why had the original manuals disappeared? The council had spent years building certainty. Now uncertainty had arrived. And uncertainty is far more dangerous to those in power than open rebellion. As night fell, I returned to my clinic. A figure waited outside. General Adrian Vale. Alone. He looked older than he had that morning. I owe you an apology. I unlocked the door. I didn't ask for one. I know. He followed me inside. I believed Helena. So did many others. He nodded once. I thought you abandoned the kingdom. I abandoned the council. They aren't the same. No. He sighed deeply. I see that now. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he placed something on my work table. A sealed military report. I found this hidden among battlefield dispatches. I opened it. Inside was a transport order signed 4 years earlier. Escort 12 crates of confiscated medical journals to Blackstone Fortress. Destination confirmed. Destroyed after inspection. Except, one line had been crossed out. In different handwriting. Transfer delayed by direct order of the Crown. My pulse quickened. The records had never reached the fortress. Someone had intercepted them. Someone loyal to the king. The report changed everything. Not because it cleared my name. Because it proved someone inside the palace had quietly resisted Helena's campaign years before. General Vale stood by the fireplace, watching the flames. I never questioned these orders. You trusted the signatures. I trusted the institution. His voice carried genuine regret. I thought loyalty meant obedience. I closed the report carefully. Loyalty without judgment becomes a weapon. He lowered his head. I understand that now. A knock interrupted us. Captain Leon entered, breathing hard. The palace is sealed. Princess Alara stepped in behind him. They've announced Father cannot receive visitors. General Vale frowned. On whose authority? The council. They have no legal right. They're acting as though they do. Thomas set down the bundle of herbs he had been sorting. They're preparing for something. Alara's expression turned grim. They moved the royal seal. Everyone in the room fell silent. The royal seal validated every decree issued by the crown. Without the king's knowledge, it could legitimize forged orders. General Vale's face hardened. If Helena controls the seal, she controls the kingdom. I finished. Before dawn, the four of us slipped into the old servants' corridors beneath the palace. Not to confront Helena, to see the king with our own eyes. The passages were narrow and dark, lined with aging bricks that muffled every footstep. Princess Alara led us confidently. I used these tunnels as a child. Captain Leon smiled faintly. I was punished twice for helping Your Highness sneak into the kitchens. Despite everything, she almost laughed. The sound vanished as soon as we reached the hidden entrance behind the royal bedchamber. She pressed her ear against the panel. Someone's inside. We listened. A physician spoke nervously. Director Cross. Another dose could stop his heart. Helena answered coldly. If he signs before that happens, history won't care. My jaw tightened. Not from anger. From certainty. She no longer feared killing the king. She feared losing control. General Vale slowly looked at me. You were right. I wish I hadn't been. The voices continued. The king won't hold the pen. Then move his hand. Princess Alara closed her eyes. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Captain Leon reached for his sword. I caught his wrist. Not yet. If we wait, we need witnesses. Helena had survived for years because every accusation lacked proof. If we burst in now, she would claim she was attempting treatment. We needed the moment no lie could survive. Leon reluctantly released his sword. Hours later, the palace erupted into confusion. A senior court minister demanded to see the king before approving emergency funding for the plague response. Helena refused. The minister insisted. More officials gathered. Then more. Arguments echoed through the corridor. Doors opened. Servants whispered. Physicians exchanged frightened glances. Control was slipping. Inside the hidden passage, Thomas leaned toward me. You planned this. No. You knew pressure would build. Yes. He smiled sadly. You become very patient. I had no choice. Outside, Helena finally lost her composure. No one enters. The minister answered sharply. Not even the crown may be hidden from the court without lawful cause. General Vale stepped from the shadows into the corridor. His voice carried across the marble hall. I agree. Helena froze. So do I. Another noble declared. Then another. One by one, influential voices joined. Not because I had persuaded them. Because Helena's own secrecy had awakened their suspicion. Consequences were beginning to gather under their own weight. I remained behind the hidden panel, saying nothing. The first crack had become a fracture. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, the missing medical records, and whoever had protected them, were still waiting to be found. The corridor outside the king's chamber had become a battlefield without drawn swords. Court ministers, military officers, senior physicians, and royal attendants crowded the marble hall, their voices colliding beneath the vaulted ceiling. The court has a right to see His Majesty. The council is obstructing royal authority. Open the doors. Helena Cross stood in front of them with perfect composure, though I noticed the slight tremor in the fingers clasped behind her back. She was afraid. Not of me. Of losing control. General Adrian Vale took a deliberate step forward. Director Cross. She met his gaze. You've exceeded your authority. I am protecting the king. No. His voice echoed through the corridor. You're isolating him. Silence followed. Helena smiled. General, after everything I've done for this kingdom, you choose now to question me. I should have questioned you years ago. Her smile disappeared. Princess Alara looked at me, through the narrow opening in the hidden passage. It was time. I pushed the concealed stone panel aside and stepped into the corridor. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "Rowan Ashford." Another voice followed. I thought he fled. He came back. Helena's expression remained calm. Only her eyes betrayed surprise. "You have remarkable timing. I was invited." "No one invited you." Princess Alara stepped beside me. I did. Every noble present immediately bowed. The balance of the room shifted. Helena's authority depended on certainty. Princess Alara had just broken it. "The king requires treatment," Helena said firmly. "He requires honesty," I replied. "You've already abandoned your duty once." I resigned. "You abandoned the people." I stopped enabling lies. Murmurs spread through the corridor. The words reached ears that had never before heard my side of the story. Helena gestured toward the chamber doors. "If you truly care about His Majesty, help us." "I will." Hope flashed briefly across several faces. Then I continued. "After everyone witnesses his condition." Her expression hardened instantly. "The king deserves privacy. The king deserves protection." A senior minister stepped forward. "I support Master Rowan." "So do I," another answered. Within moments, half the corridor echoed with agreement. Helena realized she could no longer refuse. "Open the doors." The royal chamber smelled sharply of medicinal alcohol and bitter tonics. The king lay motionless beneath embroidered blankets. His breathing was shallow. His skin carried a grayish tint that no plague victim had ever shown. I approached slowly, not as a dismissed physician, as a healer. I examined his eyes, his pulse, his fingertips, his breathing. The room watched in complete silence. Finally, I stepped back. "This isn't the plague." Helena laughed softly. "Then enlighten us." I turned toward the assembled physicians. "Observe his fingernails." Several leaned closer. Dark blue lines. One physician frowned. "I've never." "Observe the pupils." Another physician whispered. "They're uneven." I nodded. "Now smell the medicine." The oldest physician uncorked a bottle. His face changed immediately. "Nightshade." Another doctor blinked. "Mixed with plague tonic. It accelerates organ failure." The room froze. I looked at Helena. "You knew." She folded her hands. "Prove it." "I don't need to." She smiled confidently. "There are no records." "I agree." Her smile widened. Then Captain Leon entered carrying a battered wooden chest. Behind him walked an elderly man with a bandaged shoulder. Princess Alara gasped. "Archivist Rowan." The old archivist bowed weakly. "I apologize for my delay." Helena's face turned white. He wasn't dead. He had survived. The archivist carefully opened the chest. Inside were dozens of sealed journals, research records, original treatment protocols, royal correspondence. Every page carried official wax seals. The room fell completely silent. "I intercepted the transport 4 years ago," the archivist said. "The king ordered me to preserve the originals." Helena took one involuntary step backward. "No." The archivist lifted another document, a letter bearing His Majesty's personal seal. He handed it to the senior minister. The minister read aloud. "Under no circumstances shall Master Rowan Ashford's research be destroyed. Any attempt to alter these records shall be considered treason against the crown." The corridor erupted. "Treason? Impossible." General Vale slowly closed his eyes. "The forged decree." Princess Alara looked at Helena. "You forged my father's orders." Helena said nothing. For the first time in years, silence belonged to her. The old archivist reached into the chest again. "This is not all." He withdrew a leather-bound journal I recognized instantly. My original plague notebook. Not the copy Thomas had saved. The original. Its edges were stained with herbs and smoke, every page filled in my own handwriting. The archivist placed it gently into my hands. I was ordered to protect it until the truth was needed. I opened to the first page. Every observation, every correction, every warning, untouched. At the back of the journal lay something I had forgotten existed. A folded sheet, signed by Elias Mercer, dated 5 years earlier. General Vale frowned. "What is it?" I unfolded the document slowly. It was a sworn statement, written entirely by Elias. His handwriting trembled across the page. "I, Elias Mercer, testify that every discovery presented under my name belongs to Master Rowan Ashford. I accepted honors I did not earn because I feared losing everything. If this confession is ever read, it means I lacked the courage to speak while it mattered. The room became utterly still. One physician removed his spectacles. Another quietly lowered his head. No one looked at me. They looked at Helena. She remained motionless. Then she spoke. So, her voice was almost calm. A frightened apprentice wrote a confession. She glanced around the room. Does anyone truly believe it? Captain Leon answered first. I do. Then Thomas. I do. The elderly physician who had trained beside me years ago stepped forward. I watched Rowan develop these treatments. One after another, more voices joined. I remember. I was there. I attended his lectures. I copied those notes. The silence Helena had relied upon for years was gone. Not because I had persuaded anyone. Because fear had finally loosened its grip. General Vale drew his sword. Not toward Helena, but planted its tip firmly against the marble floor. Director Helena Cross. His voice carried the full authority of the Royal Guard. You are under arrest for forgery, obstruction of the crown, destruction of royal records, attempted murder of His Majesty, and conspiracy against the kingdom. Several guards hesitated. She had been their superior for years. Helena smiled sadly. You still think this ends with me? No one moved. There are ministers who approved every forged order. She looked toward the gathered officials. There are nobles who profited from every shortage. Another pause. There are physicians who remained silent, because promotions mattered more than patience. Several faces turned pale. She wasn't trying to save herself. She was reminding them that corruption had never belonged to one person alone. General Vale answered quietly. Then they will answer as well. Two guards stepped forward. This time, they did not hesitate. As iron restraints closed around Helena's wrists, she looked directly at me. I destroyed your reputation. Yes. I took your life's work. Yes. I made the kingdom hate you. Yes. She searched my face. Why aren't you smiling? I considered the question carefully. Then I answered. Because none of this brings back the people who died believing lies. For the first time since her arrest began, Helena lowered her eyes. Not in surrender. In understanding. The victory she had pursued for years had left her completely alone. Outside the palace windows, the cathedral bells began to ring. Not as an alarm, not a warning, but to summon the people. The truth would no longer remain inside palace walls. By sunset, the entire kingdom would know whose hands had truly carried them through 17 years of healing. And this time, no one could erase his name. The bells rang for 3 days. Not because the plague had ended. Not because the kingdom was celebrating. Because people needed time to understand what had happened. I stood in the palace infirmary as sunlight spilled across the stone floor. The king's breathing had steadied overnight after the poison was removed from his treatment. The old physician beside me shook his head. We nearly killed him with medicine meant to save him. Fear makes people desperate, I said. And ambition? I looked through the window toward the distant council tower. That makes them dangerous. Princess Alara entered quietly, carrying a tray of tea. The court has been arguing since dawn. About Helena, about everything. She set the tray down. Half the ministers are demanding a complete investigation. The other half are pretending they were never involved. Thomas chuckled from the corner where he sorted herbs. Politics heals slower than plague. Alara smiled faintly. Then her expression grew serious. They want you to return. I poured tea into 3 cups. To the council, to lead it. The room became silent. For years, I had imagined hearing those words. Now that they had arrived, they felt strangely distant. I won't. Alara blinked. Even after the truth came out. Especially after the truth came out. Thomas looked at me with quiet approval. The council isn't broken because one person was corrupt, I continued. It's broken because everyone learned to value authority more than honesty. Then what will happen? Alara asked. I handed her a cup. We build something different. The next morning, the palace courtyard overflowed with people. Physicians, village healers, monks, midwives, students, citizens carrying flowers and handwritten letters. I had not asked anyone to come. A temporary platform stood near the fountain where royal announcements were usually made. General Vale approached me. You should say something. I've spent years saying things. People are listening now. That was exactly what worried me. Still, I stepped onto the platform. The crowd quieted immediately. Thousands of faces looked up at me. Some ashamed, some grateful, some simply exhausted. I took a slow breath. For 17 years, I treated this kingdom. No cheers, only silence. I traveled to places no official had ever visited. I watched children survive because neighbors shared clean water. I watched villages recover because healers taught one another freely. I let my gaze move across the crowd. The plague did not return because we lacked medicine. Murmurs spread. It returned because we stopped paying attention. A woman in healer's robes lowered her eyes. We turned healing into prestige. We turned research into competition. We stopped asking whether something was true and started asking whether it was convenient. No one interrupted. I don't want your apology. Several people looked up sharply. I don't need statues. I don't need titles returned. I reached into my coat and removed the bronze medal Princess Alara had given back to me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I accepted this honor once because I believed it represented service. I looked at the medal for a long moment. Today, I return it voluntarily. I placed it on the platform. Not because service failed me. I met the crowd's eyes again. But because service should never belong to one person. When I stepped back, no one clapped immediately. Then an old village healer began applauding slowly. Others joined. Soon the entire courtyard echoed with sound. Not triumphant, respectful. That afternoon, I walked through the Royal Medical Council for the first time in 6 months. The corridors felt smaller than I remembered. Portraits had already been removed from the walls. Clerks hurried past carrying boxes of records for investigation. In the central hall stood Elias Mercer. He looked thinner, older. The golden emblem had been stripped from his robes. When he saw me, he bowed deeply. I heard your speech. I wasn't sure you'd be awake for it. The physicians finally let me out of bed. An awkward silence followed. I should have spoken years ago, he said. Yes, I wanted to. I know. He looked surprised. I knew every time you avoided my eyes. His shoulders sagged. I was afraid. So was everyone else. He swallowed hard. Can anything be repaired? I consider the question. Trust doesn't return because the truth is revealed. Then what do I do? Start by learning medicine instead of applause. For the first time, a small genuine smile appeared on his face. I'd like that. The new academy opened on the outskirts of the capital before winter arrived. It wasn't grand. No marble towers. No ceremonial halls. Just a cluster of stone buildings beside a river where clean water flowed year-round. Students planted medicinal gardens themselves. Villagers attended free lectures. Traveling healers exchanged techniques without paying fees. Most importantly, every lesson included failures alongside successes. Truth had become part of the curriculum. I spent my mornings teaching and my afternoons visiting nearby communities. The work felt familiar in a way palace politics never had. One cold evening, I found Thomas sitting beneath a bare plum tree, watching students carry bundles of herbs into the drying house. You built it, he said. We built it. He snorted softly. You know what I mean. I sat beside him. The river murmured through the dusk. Do you regret not taking the council? He asked. No, not even a little. I thought about Helena's office. The power, the influence, the endless meetings where truth competed with ambition. Not anymore. Thomas nodded. Good. We sat quietly for a while before he spoke again. You seem lighter. I stopped carrying a kingdom by myself. Snow fell the night Princess Alara visited the academy. She arrived with only 2 guards and dismissed them at the gate. Students bowed nervously as she crossed the courtyard. You've become difficult to find, she said when we met in the library. I've become easier to find. People just stopped looking outside the palace. She laughed softly. The sound no longer carried the strain I had first heard in my clinic. Father asked me to thank you again. How is he? Complaining about bland food, which the physicians say is an excellent sign. I smiled. She wandered between the shelves, reading the labels students had written in careful ink. They're calling this place the River Academy. They needed a name. They're also calling it the safest place in the kingdom to get sick. That's less poetic. She turned toward me. The court approved the reforms. All of them. Most. The rest are being argued over. Then the kingdom might actually learn something from this. Alara's expression softened. You already changed it. I looked around the library. Students studying by lamplight. Herb samples drying near the windows. Notes pinned to the walls where anyone could read them. No, I said quietly. People changed it when they stopped pretending. Before leaving, she paused at the doorway. One more thing. Yes. The king wants the academy under royal protection. I raised an eyebrow. And he understands you'll refuse if it means royal control. He's learning. She smiled. So are all of us. Months later, spring returned to the valley. The plum tree outside Thomas's cottage bloomed, white against the morning sky. I walked through the academy grounds before the students woke. A young apprentice was already tending the herb beds. He straightened quickly when he saw me. Master Rowan, what are you growing? Silverleaf and moonroot. Why those two? He hesitated. Because they grow better together. I looked at the small green shoots pushing through the soil. Good answer. As I continued walking, I realized something that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I no longer thought about the council every day. I no longer replayed the accusations, the stolen credit, the years of silence. Those things had happened. They had shaped me, but they no longer owned me. Ahead, the academy bell rang, and doors began opening across the grounds. Students hurried toward the lecture hall, laughing as they went. For the first time in a very long time, the sound felt like peace. The letter arrived on an ordinary morning. No royal seal, no elaborate ribbon, only thick cream-colored paper folded into thirds and delivered by a young courier who looked too nervous to meet my eyes. For Master Rowan Ashford. I accepted it with a nod. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a single sentence. If you wish to know how this truly began, come to Blackstone Fortress before sunset. Come alone. No signature. Thomas watched me fold the letter. I assume that's not an invitation to tea. No. You'll go. I will. He studied me for a moment. Looking for revenge. I shook my head. I'm looking for the last unanswered question. Blackstone Fortress stood abandoned on a cliff overlooking the northern sea. Years earlier, it had served as a military archive. Now its towers were weathered, its banners gone, its gates hanging open. The wind carried the smell of salt and rain. I entered without drawing attention. Footsteps echoed through empty halls until I reached the old records chamber. Someone was waiting. General Adrian Vale. He stood beside a wooden crate covered in dust. You came. You sent the letter. I did. He looked older than when I had last seen him. The burden in his eyes had changed from guilt to resolve. I've resigned. I wasn't surprised. The army accepted it. The king did. He rested one hand on the crate. I couldn't begin a new chapter while pretending the old one never happened. Silence settled between us. Finally, he opened the crate. Inside lay dozens of military files. Transport logs. Council correspondence. Private letters. I've spent months investigating every forged order. He handed me one folder. The first forgery wasn't Helena's. I looked up. What? It started long before she became director. We spread the documents across a stone table. One by one, the pattern emerged. 15 years earlier, a wealthy circle of nobles had quietly redirected funding away from public clinics. Medical shortages followed. Young physicians competed for limited resources. Recognition became currency. Truth became negotiable. Helena had not created the corruption. She had mastered it. General Vale pointed to an old ledger. She inherited a system that rewarded ambition over integrity. I read the names carefully. Several had already died. Others had retired. A few remained respected public figures. You could expose them. I could. He watched me carefully. Will you? I closed the ledger. What purpose would it serve? They enabled everything. They also no longer control anything. He frowned. Justice matters. It does. But justice isn't the same as endless punishment. He remained quiet. I spent years waiting for my name to be restored. I continued. When it finally happened, I looked toward the broken window, overlooking the sea. I realized peace didn't come from seeing someone fall. General Vale followed my gaze. It came from walking away. Exactly. He smiled faintly. I was hoping you'd say that. As we prepared to leave, footsteps echoed through the fortress. Captain Leon entered with several royal guards. Forgive the interruption. General Vale raised an eyebrow. I thought I said I came alone. You did. Leon smiled. I followed from a respectful distance. Old habits. He approached carrying another sealed document. The king asked me to deliver this personally. I broke the seal. It was a royal pardon. Not for me. For every physician who had confessed their role before the investigation concluded. General Vale looked surprised. The king chose mercy. The guilty still lost their positions, Leon replied. They simply won't spend the rest of their lives imprisoned. I folded the pardon carefully. The king had understood something important. A kingdom cannot heal if every mistake ends only in destruction. People must also have room to become better. 1 year later, the River Academy had doubled in size. New gardens stretched along both sides of the river, and students from every province studied together without caring whose family held rank or title. Research journals lined the library shelves. Every page listed every contributor. No names erased. No credit stolen. On the anniversary of the plague's end, the king visited quietly, without ceremony, without musicians, without speeches prepared by officials. He walked through the academy with a simple cane, still recovering from the poison that had nearly claimed his life. I owe you more than my health, he said. You owe me nothing. I owe you honesty. He stopped beside the garden. I failed to see what was happening beneath my own roof. You corrected it. Too late for some. Not too late for everyone. He nodded slowly. I've learned that ruling and healing share one weakness. What is that? Both fail the moment pride becomes more important than listening. I smiled. Then you've learned the hardest lesson. That evening, students gathered beneath the old plum tree. Thomas, now happily retired from daily work, occupied his favorite bench with a blanket over his knees. Princess Alara, no longer burdened by constant fear, laughed with the apprentices as they prepared lanterns for the river. Even Elias stood among them, not as a celebrated prodigy, as a teacher's assistant patiently helping younger students identify medicinal roots. He caught my eye across the courtyard, then bowed, not from shame, from respect. I returned the gesture. The past had become exactly that, the past. As darkness settled, hundreds of lanterns drifted across the river. Each carried the name of someone lost during the plague. No speeches interrupted the silence. No applause followed. Grief deserved better than performance. Thomas looked at the glowing lights. You finally stopped carrying them alone. I did. Worth the wait. I watched the lanterns disappear into the distance. Children laughed nearby. Students debated herbal combinations. The academy bell rang softly in the evening breeze. Yes, not because my reputation had been restored. Not because those who wronged me had fallen. Not because history finally remembered my name. Peace had arrived the day I stopped trying to force truth upon people determined to reject it. The truth had found its own path. It always does. I looked across the river toward the academy, where another generation was learning that healing began with humility, that knowledge belonged to everyone, and that silence was not weakness when it was guided by conviction rather than fear. For years, I had believed saving the kingdom meant saving everyone. I had been wrong. Sometimes the greatest act of healing is refusing to support what is broken, allowing consequences to reveal what arguments never could. The river flowed steadily into the night. It carried away the echoes of accusation, ambition, and regret. What remained was quieter, stronger, enduring. And when the first students returned to their classrooms the next morning, they entered a world where the truth no longer needed a single man to defend it. It had finally learned to stand on its own.